Welcome to Fields of Consciousness, the podcast for consciousness conversations with your host, myself, Jeffrey Stegman.
And Clayton Stedman.
As consciousness explorers and founders of Focused Life Force Energy, we're here to bring a holistic approach to consciousness and share practical examples of how you can take your life to the next level. From your dreams to your manifested reality, let's explore together how consciousness interacts with our everyday experiences.
In this episode, we enter the new year together and discuss the art and science of manifestation, or how to create the life that you choose.
Hello, everyone. In the celebration and contemplation of the new year, we're excited to be here with you and sharing this high consciousness, powerful manifesting process. Great to be with you again, and with you, Clayton. So, Clayton, what is manifestation? People talk about it a lot, and it'd be great to go into what is it really?
Well, in a practical way, it's just the ability to create what you intend. On the positive side, and of course, on the challenging side, it's creating the things you don't want or don't intend, which is one of the big parts of manifestation. Is we can learn a lot about how we manifest, both on the positive and negative, by just looking at our lives. So humans are powerful co-creators, and manifestation is about creating a conscious, positive reality if we're consciously good at manifesting.
So, Clayton, do you think that both consciously manifesting the positive things in your life and unconsciously manifesting maybe not so positive have equal power?
That's a good question. I would say yes. We create what we focus on, whether we want it or not. And the focusing of negativity creates just as much in the universe as the focusing on positivity. Yeah. There's probably a lot more to say about that. I mean, the nature of the universe is that it's a positive place. Otherwise, we would have all self-destructed. And so we might have to dig a bit deeper on that one. So that truth, if we were measuring it in kinesiology, might not be the highest way to express it. So we'll have to dig into that one a bit deeper.
I know we've heard from FLFE customers that things were manifesting quickly in the high consciousness field, and they were having to watch with their thoughts because some of it wasn't what they wanted, but what they didn't want. So it really is an interesting truth to know about and pay attention to.
Yeah, the old saying was, great power comes great responsibility. And when you're in a high consciousness field for a long period of time, typically your consciousness will go up. You can't guarantee that because people have free will. And when your consciousness goes up, you have more power and you're just creating faster. So the good news is you're creating faster. And the bad news is you're creating faster. So.
So one of the, we read a lot of books and we test the truth of those books. And one of my favorites, I won't go into the author, but it really talks about manifesting as a multidimensional process. Really in the dream world or the astral realm, that all of our emotions, our thought forms, and we've talked about thought forms a lot in these episodes, and now sometimes they're not our thought forms, but they're coming through our system. And visions, dreams or visions of what we want. Maybe they're daydreams. That they exist, and as a reality in this dream world, maybe at different levels of intensity, um, depending on how much energy we put into it. Like you're saying, like we put a lot of energy into not wanting something, it's still showing up there. And in that high consciousness field, or when we rise in consciousness personally, and we'll get more into that later, but there's just more power and more intensity to that image or thought form or emotion. And then, as it gets more density, then it comes into manifestation. Just wanted to throw that out there. That's something I was just kind of reading up on before we got on to, like, that's maybe one, I'm not saying it's the absolute truth, but it's maybe one way to think about how it's happening. So what about, physical things, relationships? Are you, consciously manifesting in all those areas, Clayton? Like trucking campers and things like that, on the physical side?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways we can practice the art and science of manifesting is to choose something physical that we intend to create or attract. And by that, it just means buying it sometimes. It's just creating the resources to bring it into your life. And the physical is a really great place to practice that. And so for a lot of people, as we're, focusing on things, there's some stuff, that we want to get. So as we get older, it seems that we have too much stuff. And certainly as a society, there's a lot of decluttering gurus out there. And the one that I've followed recently is Marie Kondo. She seems to be quite delightful. And so once we've got enough stuff, then oftentimes the manifesting focuses on our state, or focusing on relationships that we want to create or experiences that we want to have in the world. So that process, Jeff, where you talked about the dream world or the higher vibrational experience, bringing it into, the 3D or 4D reality, whatever you consider we're living in, or maybe we're, living in both at the same time. That's just part of how it works. Typically, it starts as an idea, as an intention. May start as some people would think of it as imagination. Become more specific in our asking, and one of the distinctions that's worth mentioning is that you can ask to receive it joyfully versus receiving it with a lot of hard work and maybe suffering. So the more specific we get, the higher the odds are that we'll receive it in a way that we're consciously intending. So there's a lot to it, and we're just sort of scratching the surface here, and we'll get into the process that we've created together and share it with all of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that distinction about joyfully versus suffering in the receiving of it, in the manifesting is, I just love that. I think one of my phrases is, suffering is optional. At least the way when I look at my life and how I move forward. It's not always, it doesn't always happen, but that's definitely the intention I'm holding, that suffering's optional.
Yeah, I think the universe is pretty neutral about it. You can bring it into manifestation in multiple different ways. And if you're not consciously choosing to do it a certain way, you could be unconsciously choosing to do it a certain way. And the way we know what's going on in our head is really what's going on in our life. And, there's always the conversation about how do you interpret that. But I think that's a pretty good principle to work on. All of us are manifesting right now in our lives, and the life we have around us is the result of our thinking and our actions. I mean, we have to be willing to take action. That is, that's part of the deal down here on Earth. And but our thinking does affect things. Negative thoughts tend to de-energize us. It's harder to take action. Positive thoughts tend to energize us. And encourages action or creates resourcefulness for action.
Yeah, that's interesting. That trusting of the universe is part of, how to manifest this idea of, in our positive visions, emotions, imagination, specific asking, like you're saying, and receiving it with joyfully, and then trusting that's the case. And, it could be a separate podcast on shadow that we talk about those unconscious patterns. For me at this point in my life, I've got a big to-do list, and, I don't consciously intending or manifesting and asking it for it to come in without being on my to-do list would be, something for me to keep in mind. So thank you.
Yeah, we all have our patterns, eh? It seems like the universe is pretty neutral about how we create things. It's just there to reflect back the inner world that we create. And some people create a story that the universe is basically a negative place or it's a positive place. If I'm going to lean anyway, I'm going to say it's a positive place just because of what we said before, that if it wasn't a positive place, it would have destroyed itself. That's, we're getting kind of into one of a more philosophical conversation about the place we live in. And if we see the place we live in as a person, if it's negative, then it makes it harder to create joy. So good to check those basic assumptions. So we just wanted to go back to the basics here and give us all a chance to look at our own view of the world, especially when there's a lot of change in the world, which maybe there always is, but certainly right now, I think that's pretty safe to say.
Yeah, it's good to hit these basics, and that being really clear about what it is and how is great, and then trusting the universe to be neutral and to bring it into us as we ask, or better. It's always the or better, and then start to look for those signs or those synchronicities.
Yeah, synchronicities seem to be reminders that we are in alignment on the path. Yeah. What was that conversation we had a couple weeks ago? Synchronicities are the language of the divine.
Yeah. And I think sign pointers or signposts was another similar one, that they're pointing out things for us that are the flow of creation, in the divine flow.
Yeah, some people see it through numbers. They see it on their clock. They'll notice a certain time. I mean, we had a lady who used to work in the office. It was always like 11:11, or 1:11, or yeah. And every time she'd seen that on the clock, she'd stand up in the office and yell out, 1:11, we're doing it. It was her thing. Yeah, his character. Let's talk about state and maintaining our state while we're manifesting. Being in a place of gratitude typically will keep us happy and appreciative. Gratitude is energizing. Of course, frustration is de-energizing. So staying in a place of being grateful for the things that are coming to us will tend to attract more good. That may be self-evident, but it's probably worth saying. If you're very frustrated with your manifestation process, then you're going to create more frustration. You can be grateful for it, even if you're not getting what you want, and that's more likely going to move you towards it than being frustrated.
Yeah, and we'll get into the details of our magnetizing process, which is on the website, and there will be a link in the notes here, so you don't have to write it down when we get into the details. and that staying in a positive state. Yeah, that's really important for me, and just paying attention to that during the manifesting process. Like, because sometimes it's easy if it's been a situation that you want to change, and there's been some tough parts about it in the past, to not carry that forward into the manifesting process, but to bring in that gratitude, and I think because we'll get into the higher power.
Mm-hmm.
The power of a much higher consciousness field than we have personally. That adds a tremendous amount of energy to the manifesting.
Yeah, absolutely. That the spiritual will could be the key for many people in taking their manifestation to the next level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we got some details here in a process. I guess we should start going through it. So typically, if you're going to begin the manifestation process, you need to take some time to decide what you're going to manifest. Sometimes it's really evident that what you want to create is something you haven't had, or you want to create more of something. But it's just pausing and reevaluating your life, and perhaps writing out the ideal life. Most people find writing things on paper creates more clarity, or typing them up in a computer or a tablet or your cell phone, whatever. Just having it in writing creates a type of accountability between you and the universe. And so writing it down, that's one of the basics. And you want to pick up the next one, Jeff?
Yeah, I really like that, the writing process for me. It seems to me that's where I connect, most. And, in the FLFE, programs and things that we do, the information. So the writing really has helped me, and then you can always come back to it. And as we said, and we're going through sort of the quick notes, and then we're going to get into the really detailed process next. After talking about the general principles, is asking help for a higher power. That's, as we said, that's spiritual will versus personal will. And wow, that can really supercharge things. And it's, our level of consciousness. So we look at level of consciousness as power. Dr. David Hawkins' map of consciousness. Each point upwards is 10 times more energy present, more energy available, or power available for us to envision and manifest our lives. So that helps, going up in consciousness, being in a high consciousness field. And then in addition to that, you're calling on a higher power, so spiritual will on the Hawkins map, is it 850, Clayton? Where does that land?
Yeah. So typically our ability to our ability to manifest is at our own level of consciousness. So the higher your level of consciousness, the quicker you manifest, and the larger scale that you can manifest. Now, working more definitely matters, and so there is a dance we do between maintaining a high state and taking action. And if you overwork, you tend to have a lower state. And if you can work the long hours that things sometimes need to come into manifestation and maintain your state, then you're better off, and you're likely going to create things more quickly. So if you're at a 500 level of consciousness on the Hawkins map, then you'll be able to create at that level, depending on your ability to take action. So there's not only the level of consciousness, but your level of functioning, if you will, how you function. And then, spiritual will, when you ask for something greater than yourself, it does calibrate at 850, Jeff. So that's 500 to the power of 350. That's a very big jump. Yeah. And what that might look like is, if you have a mission that serves you and something beyond you, then there's a power in that as well. If it's just for your own self, then there's nothing wrong with that per se.
Mm-hmm.
And your ability to manifest will increase if you can tie it to the greater good, or if it's in the highest and best interest of all creation, so to say.
Yeah. We have the. Well, I feel blessed to be in FLFE and have the mission that we have, and that things we do there tied to that mission of the optimal conditions for the evolution of consciousness. So that always, anyway, I'm just really glad to be in a mission-oriented company like we are. The action part's interesting when you look at someone like Amma, the Hugging Saint, and she's in the 850 range herself, and then her functioning's in that similar level. And you look at her organization and the universities and the bathrooms all over India and all of the hospitals and all of the things they've created that kind of flow from her vision, her manifesting. It's like, wow, she's the gold standard for me for high level of consciousness, high level of functioning, and manifesting a lot of good in the world.
Yeah, it's a great example. I mean, we've both seen her a couple times, I think, and what she's created is really extraordinary. There's other people who create big things in the world. I mean, each generation has typically business leaders that some of us look to as examples of the ability to create a company, which, in this world today, probably business has more power than government, it seems. In the past, it was the arts, maybe in the Renaissance area. Before that, it was probably the church. And then there's different times in history, government might have most of the influence. And it seems that business right now and business and economic policy probably has the biggest influence on the culture, but probably business, depending how you look at it. So having these people who are examples, I mean, if you're looking at from a consciousness point of view and a functioning point of view, I would say that Amma would be one of the top people on the planet. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that taking action, I mean, the planning is very important to maybe putting some milestones out there and action steps, but that taking that physical action, whether it's, going to a meeting, writing that email, or whatever it is that takes you closer to your vision, that's a principle that is just over and over. I've seen that work in FLFE, where we've had a vision of something we wanted to create, and as soon as we take that step, then the synchronicities start. The people show up, and I've got a great example in the FLFE research team, and so we took the steps of we have this vision of having an evidence page on the FLFE website that is just so full of evidence and different levels of evidence that it's just will stand up to any scientist, look at it, and will really help people to understand FLFE and how it works, and just go forward with a free trial and become a subscriber. And we formed the research team, and we've got a very high level research team, and I kept wanting to have more boots on the ground is one way to say it, more like doing, more getting things done. And, that we needed some other person on the team that could really work and get things done. Well, here comes a CRS candidate for our customer service who had an incredible research background. She's writing her PhD. She's been doing research in focus groups, which could work really well with FLFE. And now she's on the research team. And it was just like, it just came in so effortlessly. There was no suffering involved with that manifestation of Bala into the team. So
Yeah, it sort of almost came from left field. We had the intention, but I don't think that was one we wrote down and talked about as much as other things. And it did show up, and it sort of seems to be going, really well.
Mm-hmm. So keeping a journal is another, general principle. Sort of, we can send out these as Abraham Hicks says, these rockets of intention, and it may come in, and we may just have forgotten about it and didn't write it down or didn't keep a journal, and so that's another principle is just keeping track of what you're noticing related to the vision, and it's kind of part of trusting the universe and in gratitude and appreciation that this did happen. I can be grateful for it.
Yeah, part of trusting the universe for me is to assume that the universe is neutral about what I want to create or is positive, and that it's leading me towards that all the time. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I have to really look at what's showing up in my life and assume that it is for the eventually for the purpose of achieving the mission or achieving the goal. And it may not look like it, and I may not like it, but sometimes the universe is giving us the lesson that we need to learn to manifest it and to sustain it. So the journal is, or writing it in some place, is a way to go back and look at the patterns. It's very easy to forget the pattern in just the busyness of day-to-day life. But if you have a place to go back and look at what you specifically wrote, and some people are part of masterminds can be really helpful. And that's another place where you speak your vision to other people, and they give you feedback about what you're saying and about your state and the journey that you're on towards it. So having a group of people around you that can remind you of where you're at on the path, and encourage you once in a while, maybe hold you, maybe there's some accountability in there. Having a coach or a counselor, there's some other resources that might help, like having a I noticed in our company, Jeff, having a project manager. It's like, you put it in a project management spreadsheet and you start working on it, and there is no vagueness, and that's been a whole other level of like, what's the reality of creating this? And and a lot of times you have to let other things go just to make room, right? It's like, if you really want this, then and you're saying you want all these other things, how much time and attention can you give it? So a lot of times it's, when you really get down to making the list and looking at what it's going to take, some things have to come off the list. And at least in terms of the amount of time you put into them, it's great to be open to the universe giving it in a way that is, effortless and without any time required on your part. And if that works, great. And if it doesn't, then, go to work. It doesn't always just come to you with ease like that. Usually you have to put a lot of work into it, and you don't want to. Careful what you say, right? We're getting into managing our mind here. It's pretty easy to say that you're going to have to work really hard to get something, and it may end up that way. That may be the way it ends up, and oftentimes it seems it does end up that way. And be careful what you say to yourself. Because if you say you're going to have to work hard to receive it, then you're going to increase the odds of working hard to receive it. And there's always a bit of a caveat in here because of karma. Now, whether you believe in previous incarnations or not, karma is it's the feedback loop of the universe. And if you have a lot of good karma with deeds you've done that maybe aren't related to this thing you're in manifesting, or this experience, or this type of relationship, if you have a lot of positive karma, you might just be able to receive that with, I guess, grace would be the word. And grace is maybe the last thing I'll talk about here, and you can hand it over to you, Jeff. Is grace is the wild card. the grace of divinity, a higher power, the universe, asking for the grace of that highest power you can imagine to bless you with this manifestation, if it's for your highest good, is another way to look at asking help from a higher power, to consciously call upon the grace that is we believe is available in the universe.
I've certainly experienced that, where something I thought was going to take a lot of work and a lot of time is just done. It just appears. A bit like the research team edition. I mean, it just appeared. We didn't have to think about it, do a lot of work, sift through resumes. She just appeared, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, I think part of that was from the high consciousness field that we invested in the research team, right? I think we spent a lot of time front loading that whole. I'm going to use the term front loading that whole group of people. And so when you drop something in an extremely high consciousness container, it tends to come to manifestation quickly.
Yeah, it's like an attractor field. And we call our process magnetization, because it's like a like a magnet for intentions to manifest. So that's what we'll be getting into, the real details of that, and that's what you have linked in what we have linked in the show notes for you listeners. Yeah, that's really interesting. The grace, that it can be easy, and it's kind of back to it can be easy and without suffering and come to us just, but asking for it is really the key, it seems. And I do like this idea of manifesting as an evolutionary process. Like you were saying, that sometimes things need to come up out of our unconscious to be healed. So it's a pattern that might show up, that we feel like it has to be hard, or that we have to have a long to-do list and there's lots of work to do. In my case, that those patterns keep coming up, and healing that, transcending those, brings us forward in the manifesting, and it brings us forward in our evolutionary path at the same time, towards more freedom and more joy in our life.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we just aren't the person that can manifest what we're intending, and we don't know that about ourselves. So we just keep getting lessons. It's like, maybe we shouldn't. If you're not able to create what you're intending, you can either persist with it, which sometimes is the answer, and sometimes the answer is to change what you're intending to. Instead of if you're looking for a certain type of car, we'll just do something physical we can all relate to. If it's a certain type of car, if it costs a certain amount, and we just don't make that kind of money, and we're taking the bus or walking, maybe taking the bus and walking is good for us, maybe good for the environment. But for some people, they just, the way that the place they live, they need a car. So you can start it with one vehicle and you can upgrade, right? But if you're walking for, and it's causing a huge problem in your family, and you can afford some type of car, maybe you should get some type of car and keep moving, and break that goal down into manageable, achievable pieces that you can do, and that the positivity of having something working and moving forward can oftentimes bring it into quicker fruition, rather than saving and saving and saving forever. Forever. Maybe, you have to figure out how long that is for you. That's something I tend to do. I tend to, set a goal for something that I want, and then I'm not doing. If we're talking about a truck and camper earlier, I'd like to do a lot more camping, spend a lot more time outside, and having a truck and camper for me, because we work quite a bit, it just makes it really easy. You go out, you park, then you can go for that hike, you can go fishing, you can do what you want, and you come back. You don't have a lot of, you're not setting up, you're not taking down your tent. You can go inside if it's raining. It's just comfortable and easier. And, if you want this ultimate, expedition rig, and you're saving for that for like 10 years, well, how about you're not going camping in those 10 years, that's probably not what you want to create. So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate about you is the research you do, and the vision of like the best, like the ultimate way of going forward. And then the way we tend to work well together is, like, well, let's take let's do this first and get going. Been the keep it moving guy.
You're the keep it moving guy.
But I really appreciate the best vision of where we want to end up, that the research is there and it's not compromised, it's the end goal, and then we can work our way there. Yeah.
There's a certain amount of idealism that needs to be tempered, but it's nice to have the idealism. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Somewhere. I mean,
is there anything more about the unintentional manifestation that we want to talk about before we move on to sort of the New Year's resolution intention?
No, I think we've really covered it. I mean, if you are around complaining people, people that are negative about life tends to rub off. If your self-talk is negative, then you're actually manifesting the negativity. It's, a lot of us don't think about it that way. And there's an unintentional aspect of we're always manifesting. So just have a look at your life. And if there's things in your life that aren't what you want, then I think it's good to assume you're creating them. And that way you get a chance to look at yourself and you're not a victim to the world, because if you're not creating what you want and you think the world's out to get you, then you're a victim. And a victim isn't a great state to be in.
Yeah. Produces more of the same.
Yeah.
Well, I've been impressed through the years we've been together with your New Year process. The time you take to do your intentions for the new year. So how do you do that? I mean, there's kind of the common New Year's resolutions that people do at a party or maybe, New Year's Day. Could you talk about your process, Clayton?
Yeah, well, for me, I spent a lot of time studying different cyclic systems, we'll call it. So one of the example of it is astrology. A lot of people talk about astrology, and one of the systems I studied was a numerology-based system. And for me, the year has a real intelligence to it based upon the system that I studied. And so when I'm planning the next year, I have I believe an insight, or the system has an insight into the qualities that are available in that year that I can sort of align myself with. And so that's probably why I take a little more time than most people around that. And I look at the cycle influence, and then, I look at where I'm at with my life and what is most likely to come into fruition that next year. So, some years, there's years of sowing, there's years of reaping, there's years when you're kind of working on your own with your own will and just, taking care of details is another focus, right? And then, then there's time to go and get the harvest, and there's time to rest. So, so typically I'll look at what that influence is in the year to come, and then I'll do the standard things, write out what I intend to create and try to break it down into some manageable pieces, and then I'll look at what can I do in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. And more as I get older, I tend to leave more room to adjust than I used to. That's something I think it's good to pay attention to. And if you're so busy doing, then you might not have enough resources, which is, time, energy, and money, right, to pay attention to your state. And maintaining your state just seems to be more and more important. Maybe it's, as I get older, my goals are more state-oriented than stuff-oriented. So having space in your life to reflect and to look at what's showing up and then adjusting. Yeah, that's been a theme the last, probably 5 years. Yeah.
That's an area for me as well, to really slow down. We're really working on slowing down. To pay attention to my state and stay in a grateful, high state, loving state. And there's a lot of environmental things out there in the world that can take you down some different roads that might lead you into a less than grateful and loving state. So it's really seems even more important these days to take some time and to plan. Maybe it's part of the intention for the year is to have that time to really to meditate, to do those things. Maybe it's being out in nature, like you said, that really work to have that grateful, loving state and better be there for us.
Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about consciousness in FLFE. So, having a goal of a certain level of consciousness is really related to having a certain state. It's just, the world oftentimes doesn't talk in, levels of consciousness. More people probably talk about state than that, and other people will just refer to it as being happy, being joyous, being at peace. If you have a map of consciousness like Dr. David Hawkins created, which is a big reference point for us, and you can measure your level of consciousness, anytime you can measure things, it's harder to hide out, right? If you're writing it down and reviewing it, it's harder to hide. Your ego just loves vagueness. So if you can create something really clear, then this or better, then and you review that once in a while, then it as often as you need to keep yourself in the zone, then you're much more likely to achieve it or change it. Because if you're working really hard and it's not happening, you got to really check in with yourself. Is the goal right? Do I need to alter it, or do I need to just persist? A lot of times it's just persistence.
Yeah. And Clayton, you said, or better, this plan or better. And I know, I feel sometimes, and maybe it's part of the human condition, where we have this unconscious part of our mind. We have our unconscious part of ourselves and this conscious part that maybe we don't envision all that could happen, that like we have a limited view of what I want, but it's hugely differently better that we're not even imagining or thinking about.
Yeah, in fact, I think we had a great example of that today, or as we were planning this. One of the people we work with, Maria, was looking to buy another. She had a convertible BMW, and she sold it, and to get something else that she thought she might like more, and she went back to the convertible BMW. Or another convertible BMW, and it was an M model, Jeff. It was a Z4M.
Yeah.
Or I guess in the States you'd say a Z4M. And I don't think she realized how different the M series BMW was than the regular model. And we're kind of chuckling about that earlier because Jeff's owned a few BMWs, and we're both gearheads, so we know the difference between a regular BMW and an M model. And I think that's a pretty good example of this or better. It's like, I had one of these cars. I really liked it. I bought something else. It's like, I want to go back to what I had, but I go back and it's like way better. It's the M model. Yeah.
Yeah. I went to a conference recently, and my intention was to meet people and to, to promote FLFE, to find those partners, those people that we could really work with and advance, our being out in the world. And there were some things that were just way better that I just didn't expect. Like this, meeting someone that wants to take us into a country that we're not in, at all. And, which could be huge for us. So I couldn't have thought of that. It just was or better. So leaving that room in the description that we write, that when we're writing it, it's got that or better space left for that to happen, and not some narrow outcome that's all we think we want.
Yeah, it's the miracle zone, I guess you might call that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's talk about the magnetizing process. So when we were creating this style of manifesting, we used kinesiology to measure the level of consciousness of different ways to manifest. And we called it magnetizing because we believe that humans are magnetic. When you're really clear about what you want, you tend to bring things towards you. You attract them. Mm-hmm. There is, we have to go to work as well. That's, going out in the world and doing our thing. But there's also the magnetic part, which we've been referring to all the way along, asking the higher power for help, being clear about what we want. And so for those of you who are students of Dr. David Hawkins, the level of consciousness of this process is 997 out of 1,000. And we've had this process on our website for 3 or 4 years, and we haven't figured out how to get it to 1,000 out of 1,000. So maybe one of you will figure out what's missing here. But we spent a lot of time on it, and it's pretty thorough. And there's some unique, I'd say unique. There's one particular process in manifestation that tends to be debatable or maybe controversial. And so we're going to talk about that in detail and what our research indicates in terms of how to use that part of the brain or that part of your visualization power in terms of creating what you want. So there's something we think that is a principle that is talked about a lot, and different people have different belief systems. So the power of kinesiology potentially is to measure the truth of belief systems. So I think that'll be interesting to talk about that aspect, Jeff, when we get into that piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, this is in the show notes. There's a link, and we're going to go into really the details of this magnetizing process.
Well, again, you have to decide on what you're intending. And I'm really careful with my words in this, because if you say you are wanting something, then wanting creates more wanting. So you decide on what you're intending to create. You don't decide on what you want. It gets to be subtle, but if you're looking for those Hawkins students out there, if you're looking to get things up into the high 900s, you've got to be really granular about examining the exact words. And that's why we have the show notes, and it'll be on the website and accessible through different media. So it's very specific, and you can go back to it if you want and look at the specific language, because it's there for a reason. So you have to choose, and you have to choose who you want to be, choose what you want to do, and choose the things that you intend to have. And there's lots of resources in the world to help us with that, but the standard in goal setting is the SMART acronym, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and tangible, or some people say time specific. And this process we're taking you through includes and transcends that concept.
Mm-hmm.
Another big piece of this, I'll hand this next step off to you, Jeff, is to be really conscious about creating something that aligns with your values. It's really easy to buy into the Instagram version of life, or some version of life that appears to be appealing, but the reality of living it is not what fits for you. So be aware that what you're choosing may be influenced by media or by other people more than it aligns with your own internal values. And there's a lot that could be said about that. That could be a whole conversation. That could be a whole hour. I've often thought maybe we should put a values process in here, Jeff, but I think we just encourage people to go out and get really clear about their values. There's processes that you go through to determine your values. And that can take, 10, 15, 20 hours of thinking and going through checklists. And there's places and people out there that can do that for you. But for the purpose of today, it's just to remind you to pay attention to the influences in your life and what's driving you.
And it goes back to some of the previous podcasts talking about thought forms, emotions that are, showing up in our awareness, and we may think are our thoughts, but could be coming from these influences, like you say, whether it's social media or cultural or just local things that are occurring that, they're not really you. And they could color your intentions. So that's great. I really like that. Maybe that will take us to 1,000 out of 1,000 there, Clayton.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't measure it since we put that in there. So we might have to get out the arm and see what it says.
Yeah. So the focusing on taking the next step. So again, this is one of the general principles that, once you get in intention and you're getting clear about that you're starting to have steps going forward, a plan, and that naming those, could be really helpful, because when you name it, then you can put it on a sticky, you can have a list, and you've kind of boiled it down to a name. An example is you want to improve your health. You have a health goal, kind of an overall well-being and health goal. And a step could be exercise, rather than, running twice a day. You have an exercise, kind of boil it down. So that can be helpful in this process of creating your manifesting process here. And then timing again there, in your planning, as Clayton said, the kind of the specific, tangible, part of your intention can be timing.
Yeah.
So now let's go into the actual process. So this is starting the magnetizing meditation. You could call it a prayer as well. And, it's really looking to increase the synergies and the synchronicities and the flow and the ease. And again, you don't have to write this down. It's in the show notes.
Okay, I guess we'll pick up number A here. So let's decide so we've chosen what we want to do. We focus on taking the next step. And then this is more of using, the mental part of it, different than, the last step, which is, taking action in the world. So we decide what we're magnetizing. We, take some small realistic steps, write it down, and writing it down may help. Then we create a simple, clear visual image. And this is where this distinction we talked about earlier is debated in the world a lot. So if you're looking to purchase that car, for example, some people say you should be seeing yourself behind the wheel of the car, driving it and enjoying yourself. Other people say you should be seeing yourself in the car from a third person point of view and noticing yourself going down the road in the car, seeing that person smiling and seeing joy on their face, a positive emotion. And there is people out there who say the more positive emotion you can create, the quicker it might come into manifestation. The point for us today in this step is that if the mind assumes it has something, it loses incentive to create it. So if you see yourself behind the wheel, the mind assumes it has it, and it does not have the same incentive to create it. So having the other third person position, seeing yourself enjoy it, it tends to stimulate the mind, or it stimulates the mind more because it's seeing the picture of joy out in front of it, and it wants to create that. Now, you might not agree with this, but we did a lot of research on it, and the third person position of seeing yourself enjoy it rather than being behind the wheel enjoying it is more powerful in terms of manifesting. So that's that's our opinion.
And you've tested that as being, a higher consciousness approach, I assume, on this step to have that clear visual third person image.
Yes, we've written out both processes and tested the level of consciousness or truth of the perception of each of them. And the third person one is, the first person one is actually much lower than the third person one.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So this step of creating that clear image that you're going to use, for the rest of this process is really important. And I see it all the time in myself and in meetings sometimes where the image gets like there's too many things. There's 4 or 5 things. And they may be images, but they're, in this case, we're talking about one clear visual image of the third party look at the joy and the excitement of having that. And then that clear image kind of goes through this whole process, rather than trying to put too much into one manifestation process. You would take one image, take it through, and then if you have something else, you come back and you run through it again, rather than trying to put too many things in the bucket at the same time. Is that?
Yeah.
You agree with that, Clayton?
Yeah. At some point, you have to get enough energy moving on that image to have it start to create something. And if you take, the 10 units of energy that you have, and you put 2 units of energy into each, to 5 different things, and it might not have enough energy to bring it into manifestation. So it's typically best to focus on one thing and get some momentum on it, and then pick something else and get some momentum on that.
So the exercise example, you would see yourself from a third party perspective, at the end of a 1 hour workout, you're smiling, you're feeling good, you're looking really strong, and that could be your image.
Yeah.
That you would then take through the rest.
Yeah, the image could just be showing up showing up. A lot of times, if you just bring the body, the rest of it will happen. Right? We talked about that this morning. just showing up. So that's probably step B of the magnetizing. Step C would be to quiet yourself, and we have a meditation that we're going to provide, and that will be continued. But you need to get really present in your own body as you're doing this, and turn off your media. Don't doing this in traffic on the way to work isn't the ideal place. Got to find a quiet place. Noise canceling headphones are a great invention, and whatever works for you. But getting quiet and getting present, that increases the power, because you're focused on that thing and not all the interruptions that could come in.
then the next step. So we've got the vision clear. We've got a nice quiet spot. We've kind of moved into that quiet meditative state. Is connecting to a higher power, and that's however we conceive it. Just a loving, benevolent power. And that seems to be this key spot of that spiritual will, moving things into this really, this 850 on the Hawkins map energy. How do you do that, Clayton? Or is there more that you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, the word God triggers a lot of people. I mean, every heinous crime and that you can imagine has been committed in the name of God. So I tend to think of it as divinity. I call upon divinity. Sometimes I call upon one of the masters, we'll call them, people who've walked the earth and demonstrated, I guess, the highest, or at least perceived to be the highest expressions that we can have as humans. In the Christian world, Jesus is, probably the one that most people would relate to. And there's Krishna and Buddha. So I call upon one of those, and I call upon the archangel realm to help me connect to divinity. I typically call in other help. And, eventually I start to feel that in my body. There's a kind of a state that my body goes into. It's, it just gets more and more relaxed. My shoulders drop. I tend to be a little bit warmer. And sometimes I'll get some tingling. I just notice my heart start to beat slower, and then come into that zone. Yeah, that's how I do it.
And we're inviting those energies into the vision that we created.
Yeah, that would probably be the next step, is to ask that higher power to have those energies come in and support the manifestation. Yeah, absolutely. So it's connecting and then requesting that they help. Yeah, I don't think you can ask too much, or you can't. I don't think you can ask too many people or too many beings, depending how you see that side of life, or you can't ask too much of the universe. So it just if this is one area where I might spend a little bit too much time, this is probably the one, because I just keep asking and asking and asking, and then so would be step E, is to ask divinity to call upon the grace of those energies in the world, the grace of itself. Bring it to me in a way that I can imagine. Bring it with ease and grace. Bring it in your time. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, we might have a smaller vision of what's needed. We're just asking this higher power, this aspect of creation, to this divinity, creator, however we think of it, to bring in everything that would be helpful to us to manifest this vision that we can't even think of. I really like this idea of asking for help. And it's something that's just been proven over and over to me with our work in FLFE and my own personal work, is just, if you don't ask, you don't, the help, maybe this is free will, and that when you ask, you're opening yourself up to this help in a different way. So it seems like a really important step, that asking for all these aspects of creation, these positive aspects, to come in and help us manifest the vision.
Yeah, I mean, the more you get aligned with a mission that serves yourself and the greater good and all of creation, if you will, the more it seems that there's help available as well, which is kind of interesting how that works. Yeah. And then we're looking at, we had clear the restraints. That's number F. And so we typically ask a higher power to clear anything from the past that is restraining this from happening. And then we'll ask it to clear anything from the present that's restraining this from happening. And then we typically ask the higher power to clear anything in the future. So as we move forward and we're able to create this, we want to maintain it joyfully. So we ask for those things in the future that, particularly, I typically think around these steps, Jeff, is more the karma part, the things that I can't see, that you just call upon the grace of God, or the grace of divinity.
And we were talking yesterday about restraints versus obstacles, the languaging and the restraints is more appropriate to higher consciousness in this process to use the word restraints, because it might be, an obstacle. You tend to think of a big boulder in your way or something like that, but a restraint could be a belief system or a belief that I can only accept this much good into me, not all the good that's there for me. So that's a restraint that we could ask to clear. And like you said, from the past, it could be ancestral, this lifetime, could be previous lifetimes. Anything that's could be restraining the vision for manifesting.
Yeah, when you're choosing words like this, if you have a particular association with a word, restraint or restraining, then use what works for you. But as a measurable kinesiological response to the word that would be higher for humanity, obstacle tends to be associated with something physical, and restraining tends to be associated with something that is more than physical and more than physical. So again, just you got to find what works for you. We're just giving you general principles. And then number G is asking your higher power that your good deeds and the goodwill associated with you be applied as grace. And so this is asking for some of the goodwill you've created in life to be, I call it cashing in the chips a little bit. We're all doing some good out there. That's been debated by a lot of people. But for those of you who are listening to this and you've this far into the interview, you're probably on the path, as many of us say, on the spiritual path. And you can, it doesn't hurt to ask for the good that you've created in the world be applied to help you manifest this. Because, if you're setting goals that bring more joy into your life, there's typically a benefit to the rest of life. And so asking that the history of your good deeds be applied to this as grace. And then you can go back into the vision and, feel the feeling of it being complete and done, and seeing that joy of from the third person point of view again, and being present with the third person perspective of the joy that person you're seeing, being present with the joy they're having and the gratitude that they're feeling, and just thanking the higher power for helping you complete it. So you assume it's completed, that you're going to be able to manifest it, and you give thanks. And so again, all this is written in great detail, but those are a little more granular aspects to asking for your good deeds to be applied to bringing this next level of joy into your life and into the world around you.
And I know when we created this, there was a 3 minutes, kind of a timer on holding this feeling of gratitude and, seeing the vision and the joy and of it completed, and that gratitude to the higher power. Where did the 3 minutes come from? Was that a calibration?
Yeah, there's different manifestation courses out there that talk about, there's a certain level of focus that comes into play when you're at 68 seconds and, 120 seconds. There's different people believe different things. The point is you need to give it some time. And there's something that happens around 3 minutes that crosses a threshold of you being in that state, where if you're seeing yourself experiencing that joy and you're able to hold it for a couple of minutes, then it amplifies that coming into existence. Yeah. It's just good to have a number so you can put to it. I mean, I typically have my phone around, so or have some type of alarm clock, and I'll just time myself at this point, because when you get into that, if you have more time, great, but sometimes the mind starts to wander after a while. But usually, if you can hold it for 3 minutes, then longer is great, but then you can turn it off, and that's only going to be a certain amount of time. You can go on with your next thing, or you can hold it longer if you're in the place to do so.
Yeah, and what I like to do is run through this a few times with different visions. Like once I've gone through that 3 minutes or more and I've really marinated in that vision, that I may have another vision queued up. And then, go back up to that, really refining that third person view of that vision and taking it through all these same steps. It's part of really getting some energy, like you were saying before, on that particular vision. And then once that feels complete, you can move on, continue to stay in this kind of nice state that you're in, and kind of do another run through with a different vision. And as we said, if what we'd said earlier is true about this multidimensional aspect, the more energy that you have on it, the more solidity it has, and the more likely it is to come through in the manifesting.
Yeah, if you've gone this far through the process and you've spent 3 minutes, you're probably in a good state. And then once you're in that good state, if you've got the time, you can, it's easy to go back through it again, because you're in the right frame of mind. And so that's a good reminder, Jeff.
So we'll have a printed version of this that you could use and refer to as you go through the steps. Well, the takeaway for today is, we provided you with some tools, and we'd love for you to try it, see how it works for you. And as we said earlier, the more specific and clear that it can be, that's in a small step that you can then see the results of. And it's always great to take it in small steps, get the results quickly, rather than the really large vision that might take time to manifest something that can show up for you relatively quickly.
Yeah, there might be some new things to consider in this manifestation process, or you might just find it interesting to have to be reminded. And there is a science to it, and there's an art to it. The science is, we've laid out the calibrated, measurable truth of the process as high as we could get it. And that's the science part. And the art is really making it work in your life. It's finding the time to do it. It's getting a team of people on board, if that's what works for you. There's a part of this process that you have to make your own. And that's, I think, where the artistry comes in. It's having that unique expression of you as the only person that is you, on the planet, and the only person that's ever been you. And there's an artistry to finding your own way with this process and other ones. So that's the artistry. And we thank you for sharing this time with us, and good luck with your manifestations. And we'll probably be talking about this more in the future, Jeff. This is a big topic in the world. And depending on the feedback you give us, we can dig into a piece of it in more detail. And we'd be glad to do that, because it's a really fascinating topic. Thank you for joining Fields of Consciousness, the podcast of consciousness conversations. We invite you to visit the link below the episode to experience a completely free trial of Focused Life Force Energy for 15 days.
If you like, you can subscribe to the Fields of Consciousness podcast and tune in next time. We release new episodes every other week on Tuesdays at 11:11 a.m. PST. Onward and upward.